You enter a war with a an active foe, so that plan that you may have on the shelf may or may not represent the conditions that you were intending. So you could plan to have a war with Iran, but it's based on the intelligence and capabilities that you think that they have, and things that you think that they're going to do. Kind of like the first, several plays of a football game where you scout your opponent, and then you
Right.
come up, your first 10 or 12 plays, and you think that's what they're going to present, but what they actually present may not represent that, right?
Up for day. It's your innovation coach, Rob Jackson, and welcome to another edition of the Innovate Guam podcast where we explore all things innovation, technology, and improvement related to the island of Guam. Like, subscribe, and follow me on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Substack. My podcasts drop at the beginning of each week, and you can also look for my Innovate column in the Pacific Daily News on the first and third Fridays of each month. All right, my guest for today's episode is Colonel Samuel G. White III, retired United States Air Force. He is a former Air Force officer, command bomber pilot, former Guam operations group commander, former CENTCOM planner, and one of the sharpest air power thinkers I know. Sam is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering. He later earned a master's degree in mechanical engineering from California State University, Fresno, and a second master's degree in systems engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology. Over the course of a career spanning more than 25 plus years in the United States Air Force, Sam flew the T 37, T 38, B 52, and B 2 Spirit stealth bomber. He was an instructor and evaluator pilot in the B 2 community and later commanded bomber operations at the highest levels. One of the most relevant assignments in Sam's career for today's discussion occurred between 2006 and 2009 when he served in the Joint Planning World and worked as an operational war planner supporting U.S. Central Command. CENTCOM is the combatant command responsible for military operations across the Middle East, including the current airstrikes against Iran. That means that when Sam talks about how air campaigns are developed, how strike options are presented to the president, and how risk and escalation are managed, he is speaking from firsthand experience inside the planning system itself. Many of you are here on Guam may also remember Sam from his time as the 36th Operations Group commander at Anderson Air Force Base. In that role, he led bomber and air operations during a critical period of continuous bomber presence here in the Pacific. Since retiring from the Air Force, Sam has continued serving in aviation and education. He has flown commercially for Delta Airlines and has taught mathematics through Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's worldwide campus. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you my brother, my classmate, and one of my best friends, Colonel Samuel G. White III. Sam, welcome back to the podcast.
What's up, Rob J? It's good to be a repeat offender. I am a little disappointed in that intro. You left off the most important one of my accolades, which is B Squad from prep school.
I love it. I love it. So, since you are a repeat guest, we're not going through the icebreaker questions. We know where your head is at in terms of innovation. We've already been through that. So, we're going to jump right into the meat of today's discussion. A year ago, we had Operation Midnight Hammer, right? Pretty quick strikes against target sets in Iran. And I had you on here talking about what is it like to fly a B 2 global strike mission particularly against a target set like the ones in Iran. Well, here we are again, um, over the course of more than a week or so of airstrikes against Iran again. So we're revisiting that subject. So let me start with a broad question. From your perspective as a B 2 pilot and CENTCOM planner, how do you assess the current U.S. air campaign against Iran?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell. There's not a whole lot of information coming out of there. Haven't seen how that plan was kind of, or elements of that plan was put together. I can only kind of speculate. One of the things that jump out at me is when we develop these strategic war plans, it's never just one element. It's never just an air plan. It's always a combined arms plan. So uh, when we get our operational objectives, the warfighter will tell us what desired effects that they want, and then the planners will figure out what tool or sets of tools would be best to address that. Usually it's got to have layers too. So air power isn't always the best thing. Sometimes we'll use naval strike or special operations, or even something from not even next to them, like cyber.
Yeah,
Really the desired effect and not the way you kill or affect something. That's why we say a desired effect. Sometimes you don't want to destroy a target. Sometimes you just want to render it inoperative or don't let it do its planned function for a certain length of time in order for other things to happen, and then it can go back to normal. And you do that for a variety of reasons. Sometimes you don't even want them to know that you have that capability. And so
yeah,
just blowing something up is not necessarily your only end state. And so one of the
that's a
reasons why air power isn't typically the only thing that you use is because your desired end state has nothing to do with explosions. It's usually to influence somebody to do something else. So an air campaign is usually an element of a major campaign, holistically, if that makes sense.
yes. So spoken like a true student of Clausewitz, right? War is just politics through other means, right?
Right.
So let's talk more about effects-based planning, because that was a great touch on effects-based planning. The idea that the war planners who are tasked with this are looking to achieve certain kind of effects. So if the president and the National Command Authority say, I'm looking to accomplish regime change in Iran, then those military planners are going and say, how do I achieve the effect of regime change? So, what things do I need to do? What targets do I need to strike in order to accomplish that goal? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, as a military planner, when you say regime change, I will say right off the cuff that I have a very minor role in that. And when I was a sitcom planner, we used to have these multifunctional planning teams. So for the military end, it was just all the J's, the intel, the operations, the logistics, the exercises. All those folks work together from each of the services to kind of figure out how we were going to do the military part of a certain plan. Something like regime change, though, we're going to use every other element of power in order to affect that. And again, the military is a very small part of that. Things like diplomacy, information, economic, financial, legal, all those have to come together. And so we would work with our partners, usually in Washington, D.C., from those other agencies, Department of State, USAID, Department of Justice, to kind of figure out, if we want to achieve regime change, what does that look like? Because we've learned over at least 70 years of trying to impact regimes, which most of them, if not all of them, have been unsuccessful. But when you cut off the head of the regime, if you will, that's not the hard part. The hard part is what replaces it. So,
Yeah.
normally we have a
Yes.
some sort of organized coalition that we've been trained, that we've already, or at least we cooperate with, and know that we have shared objectives, and then we try to support them. In Afghanistan we had that. In Iraq, we had that. In Libya, we had that. And so, it's hard to impact a regime if you don't know what's going to come in behind it, because the danger is obviously if it's worse than what you what you took off, then that's not necessarily a good thing. So
Yeah, that's a good point, particularly in this day and age where there are some who will openly say that they don't really care. They just want the current one gone, and that's it. Um, but let me ask you another question. When most people hear the phrase air campaign, right, they imagine airplanes taking off, dropping bombs, or turning home, right? But what the public sees is really just a final piece of a much larger system, right? So, for the average listener, what actually constitutes an air campaign? And do you just have that like sitting on the shelf? Are they predetermined kind of things? Walk us through that.
yeah, yes. So the short answer to that is sometimes they're on the shelf, but you enter a war with an active foe, so that plan that you may have on the shelf may or may not represent the conditions that you were intending. So you could plan to have a war with Iran, but it's based on the intelligence and capabilities that you think that they have, and things that you think that they're going to do. Kind of like the first, several plays of a football game where you scout your opponent, and then you
Right.
come up, your first 10 or 12 plays, and you think that's what they're going to present, but what they actually present may not represent that, right? And
Yes.
so when you talk about the air campaign,
Good
again, even
analogy.
militarily, that's the small slice of the broader campaign. So um, if you talk about Central Command, so Central Command includes all elements of combat power, right? So it's got the Air Force air campaign, well, I guess including the Navy air power. So you have the CFAC, the air campaign commander, and then you have the naval component of that. You have the land component of that. You have now the space component of that, and then you have the special ops component of that. All of those have to work together in order to
The
get
cyber piece of that.
right, and a cyber piece of that, exactly.
Yeah.
And all of those six things have to integrate together to achieve the overall commander's objectives. So if you think about it, just the air campaign is a very small slice of that. It's the most visible slice. It's the one that everybody likes to see because you see things blowing up and whatnot. But again, it's only a really small slice of the overall campaign. Now, you asked if these things are on the shelf. Well, it depends, because when the president comes up with his national security strategy with his national security advisor, they come up with priorities. What do I think are the biggest threats to the United States, right? And so they'll come up with their priorities. And then after that, the chairman is going to come up with a defense strategy. And that's going to put all those. And so the national security strategy is not just for the military. All the elements of the executive branch use that in order to come up with their plans as well, right? And so
Right.
when the chairman comes up, the secretary of defense comes up with in conjunction with the chairman a defense strategy. They use, well, what can we do militarily to address these priorities? Because all those priorities should have like a desired end state. Like, for example, it may or may not be regime change, but all of them have to be, this is my priority and this is why. An easier example other than regime changes, we don't want this country to have nuclear power or nuclear offensive capability, right? And from a military perspective, that's easy to do, right? Because, okay, I need to identify where that is and figure out a way to either eliminate or keep them from using it. Whether it be a
Right.
delivery platform or their ability to mate it. There's lots of different ways that you can peel that back. And so that would be part of the national defense strategy. And from that national defense strategy, those theater commanders, like the CENTCOM commander, can pull out objectives, and those objectives would fill in those in the plans, in those on the shelf plans that would be for the services to then figure out how to resource. So CENTCOM doesn't have necessarily fielded personnel all the time. They have them assigned to them if the plan gets executed. But the services then look at those plans and say, okay, these are the effects that I can do in order to achieve this objective. And that's how we end up with buying X number of F-35s, or we need
Yeah.
100 and some, all those plans over, collectively result in a certain number of resources for each service. So the services then pay for them. And then you say, well, how do you train to that? And that's just not for planes. That's for bullets, beams, bombs, missiles. That's how we justify all of those allocations. They're not random. It's based on what the president says is a priority, and it changes every 4 years or so.
About every 4 years or
5
so.
years, yeah, because of the quadrennial,
quadrennial defense review. Yeah.
And so it's so that what's important about that is these priorities span presidencies. So normally there's not huge changes in these as it goes from president because the threats to our national defense are largely the same, and that inserts stability, in our buying process, because you see how long it takes to acquire a resource like an airplane or something. You can't just decide year to year, well, now I need an F-35, well, now I need this, because it would never be responsive enough to get the resources required. And it goes even further than that. So that'll dictate how many personnel that you need, how many people to fix it, how many people to load it, how many people to fly it. And then it also goes all the way down to their tactics, right? In order to address this threat for this plan, assigned to this priority, I need to be able to kill this type of target. And that's what drives our day-to-day training, and at the service level, they say, well, how many of these bomb runs do you need in order to be proficient at killing this type of target? If we harken back to the Iran target from back last summer, we had a certain number of those type of bomb runs that, the command structure said, hey, they need to do this many bomb runs in order to be proficient at killing this target set. And so if you think about it, that spans all the different effects across all the different platforms, across all the different services. And that's how all that plan goes together, which should show you that the air power piece is just one part, because now we've got a sailor sitting in a submarine, with a surface a missile launch that they can launch, submarine launch missile, SLBM.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it out there. But and it goes down to some rifleman in an army unit, in an army platoon, he needs to be able to fight whatever that effect is, right? So for a cyber warrior, what programs do I need to be able to offensive or defensively employ in order to get this desired effect?
Right. Yeah, that's a great introduction to kind of the national security system. Put that on a hanger, because we're going to come back to that later on in the podcast. Right now, I want to go back to you're in the CENTCOM planning war room, right?
Yes.
So you're in the war room for right now. Take us through kind of the first steps of understanding your target country, in this case, Iran, as a system, looking at its air defenses, its command and control networks, its airfields, its missile forces, its hardened sites, logistics, communications, etc. What does the intelligence preparation process look like in practice to give people, this is what you should target?
Right. So it starts with the priorities and the objectives again. And so we had cross-divisional teams that would take those priorities and objectives and then gather intelligence about the things that you were talking about to kind of figure out what we did and didn't need to do. So you start with, what's important. Usually the command structure, the command and control structure is the most important part that you want to impact, because at the end of the day, your overall objective is to get them to stop doing something. And if you impact the decision makers, so the cost of what they're doing is too high for them to keep doing it, then they'll stop doing it. And that's just generically. And so a lot of our planning focuses on command and control first, right? And then the next thing that we try to do is if it's not something that a capability that we're trying to eliminate, whether it be an offensive capability or a nuclear capability. We try to protect our fielded forces, right? So in order for us to impact their offensive capability against potentially our fielded forces, we start looking at rolling back their defense systems, right? That does a couple of things. It allows other effects to participate because the more integrated and elaborate their defense systems are, the fewer platforms that are able to get in there to do effects. Whether it's so tightened down that we just got to send one snake eater special ops, under a wire in the costume to go and cut one wire. But we start, and then then it goes from that to stealth platforms, low observable platforms, and then start rolling in more and more forces to even maybe boots on the ground. So you need a certain level of freedom of action by rolling back their defenses in order to impact the operation. And then
Yeah.
you want to be able to impact their offensive capability, because again, that tells the defense, as long as they have some sort of offensive capability, the decision makers could potentially have options, right? And so you don't
Yeah.
want them to have any more options, and so you want their options to negotiate a peace under terms and conditions of your choosing, right? And so we look at things like that. We look at things like their sustainment. So logistics is important for us to impact effects. And so we look at impacting their logistics as well, because if you could cut them off logistically, even if they had an offensive capability, the residual one, if they don't have a means logistically to project that power, then they don't, they won't be able to do it. And then like informationally or psychology, we used to drop leaflet bombs, the bomb, it's not really a bomb, it's just a casing that's full of messaging to the populist criteria. Get them on your side. Like, look, hey, this will all stop. We know you're being oppressed, or whatever the messaging is. And so we got people that study the populace to kind of figure out what messaging is going to get them to not support the folks that we're trying to impact. And so all
Right.
those sort of integrate together, and that's just from like an air perspective almost, even though you can use lots of other different elements of power militarily to impact those.
Yeah, that's a really great discussion about um, how modern air campaigns aren't simply about destroying individual targets. It's really more about aiming to disrupt systems and impact or influence decision making in your enemy. So you did a really good job of kind of explaining how that's done. So you talked about kind of early priorities, right? And then we'll go back to the Iran example. One of the early priorities would be like suppression of enemy air defenses, um, also known in your community as SEED or DEED, right? Um, why are those missions so critical, and why do they happen usually the first beginning of an airstrike?
Yeah, it allows freedom of action for more players. So it allows more forces to get closer to putting effects on the desired targets, and so in air power parlance, we call that air supremacy. Air supremacy is you got freedom of action across the whole AO. Air superiority, you just have like localized, and even for like certain time periods or certain geographic positions, you can just have complete freedom of action. When you have freedom of action, then your intel improves, your logistics improve, not just your targeting, everything improves, because you're not worried as much about defending yourself. As it's like a boxer, if the guy can't throw a punch at you, you can throw punches at your choosing, and so that's sort of what
Great
we're looking
analogy.
at. Right, we're not trying
Great
to fight it.
analogy.
Yeah.
So that's why early on in the air campaign, those first strikes you see are usually taking out enemy air defenses, radar networks, all of that. And again, like you said, it's not necessarily always just bombs. It might be through cyber or computer attack against their radar network to take that radar out so that the aircraft that are coming in to strike other targets can have that freedom of action and not have to worry about getting hit.
Right, right. And see, and sometimes it's not always, you want to do the least amount of effort or destruction in order to achieve your objective. That's why it's so important. One of the biggest lessons learned we learned from Vietnam is you have to have clear, easily defined military objectives with overwhelming force in order to be successful. So, what does that mean? Yeah, that I know exactly what the desired end state is. I know what it looks like, and then because I know what it looks like, I know how much force it would take to get it. That Operation Midnight Hammer. I want you to kill X number of sites. Kill means it's rendered inoperable.
Yeah,
I know what that looks like because a PK of this, because I know what the
yeah,
facility looks like. I need this size of a bomb with this amount of accuracy, which will require this number of bombers. Easy to define. You know, when you talk about things like regime change, what does that mean? What is my military objective with regime change? Just kill the leaders? You know, is that the end of it? Because what we saw with Iraq is we had sprouting, budding other regimes that like ISIS and
yes,
ISIL that we had to later keep killing until we were like, well, okay, this is just like whack-a-mole. So,
right,
but back to the original point, if you look at the Venezuela operation, we didn't have to really roll back their entire military defenses because sometimes you want to leave the country somewhat intact, right? Because
right.
what you don't want to do,
You didn't
that's why
want to
we don't.
break everything. Yeah,
Right, you don't want to break everything because the people have to live there, and if everybody's pissed off because you broke everything, now they're all going to be mad at you because you destroyed all their bridges, all their schools or whatever, and now they're even madder. And so that's not, you want to use the minimum amount of force for you to get the desired effect. So you don't necessarily even have to roll back all their IADS if that's not the desired objective. Roll it back enough, hit your
talking about
well.
the integrated air defenses, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep, exactly. So for a major war, yes, you want to just take it all out. But sometimes you don't necessarily need to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after you do that, early kind of targets are trying to get you so that you take out the defensive, so their defenses, so that you can have freedom of action and you're not worried about getting struck. All right. Then once you kind of achieve that, what does the target set kind of evolve into after that first 24 hours? What are the next, 24, 36, 72 hours look like? What kind of target sets or do you open up and expand to after you've achieved those initial ones?
Yeah. So yeah, after you run through your script, the scripted days, however many days or hours your script is going to be. So you're gonna hit your key targets, and 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 then kind of see what their reaction is. But then you got to figure out if you got the desired effects. And so in intermediate targets, you've got to assess those to see if you need to hit them again because they may be
Mm,
key to getting to your ultimate objective. And so we have the air tasking order cycle. Once you get past your kind of your initial playbook to go through that, plan, operate, and then assess and that's a 24 cycle for each one of those. But the assessment piece doesn't necessarily take 24 hours. So if, in other words, if I wanted to hit this critical integrated air defense site, it is not promised that it's going to take me 24 hours to figure out if that works or not. The enemy can get really good with, they know what's important to them, and they know that because it's important to them that it's important to you or us to take it out. So,
right.
like for
They hide it.
well, or they hide or they just turn it off, right?
Turn it off. Yeah,
Right,
turn it
right,
off too.
because they
Yeah,
know that they're trying to kill me, right? And so, do you know it's dead though? So it's really hard to see if you got the desired effect because there's some risk involved, obviously, if it's not and you push forward anyway. So
right.
that's where sort of the fluidity of the whole planning process is involved. And
So that's a
so,
great segue. So let's take us into the Air Operations Center, right?
Mhm.
Explain to me about the Air Operations Center and how it's used to manage the uh, campaign and that whole air tasking order that you talked about and the cycle associated with it on every 24 hours that's kind of going on in order to manage this chaos, if you will.
Right,
That's
right, right. So uh, in the air tasking order originates from the Air Operations Center, who's basically the planning arm for the JFAC CFAC, which is the Air Component Commander. J is for a joint, if it's just a joint force, and then C is a coalition. So you have other countries in there. And so for the JFAC has this Air Operations Center planning team to generate these air tasking orders, and each one of these air tasking orders include the instructions in a 24-hour period for all the participants. And it's not just bombers and fighters. It's for the tankers. It's for the command and control. It's for the reconnaissance. It gives their instructions when and where, and to
you're
some extent,
supposed to be.
when and where, and to some extent, how they need to do what they're going to do. We leave it to the units, you know, because what they're supposed to do again is just an effect. So they don't tell a bomber that you need to put this type of bomb with this kind of fuse on there to they just say, hey, we want this target offline for 24 hours, right, or however long it's going to take. Now they'll have subject matter experts embedded in there to kind of shape that to see what's in the realm of possible. Yeah, you can give that to a bomber, or yeah, you could give that to an F-15E. They should be able to handle that. But then the units further decompose that air tasking order to kind of say, okay, I'm going to need this many of this kind of bomb, this many of this kind of bomb, and I'm going to need this much gas because I need to go over to here. Actually, we need 4 airplanes, in a spare. That's where that sort of breaks out, and it also tells the folks how they're going to communicate with each other. So there's various platforms across not just units but services, because this is an air campaign, not or an air
Right.
component, not just the Air Force component. And it talks about that as well as the rules of engagement. So then the commander will have an intent, which means, hey, I'm going to take so many losses or whatever. So it tells you how much risk that you can
Or
take, as
collateral damage.
how much collateral damage, places that you can and can't go as you're trying to attack your target. How we're going to address threats. Will we consider threats? But those all fall in the rules of engagement that are embedded in that air tasking order. Now, the big picture of how we come up with the plan for like what to do for each thing is called the find, fix, track, target, engage, assess kind of flow. So, in order to find a viable target, we know we got to find where it is because sometimes it moves. We got to fix it. So, what does fix mean? That means, if it moves, does it go between here and here? Does it, like for an individual, is there a pattern of life, and that kind of,
Right.
can we ever get a lat long elevation from a bomber perspective of that what we're trying to hit, and then we'll track it over time. Again, the pattern of life thing. Um,
Yeah.
this missile system typically is set up at site A, B, or C. And it moves every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, and so we get that tracking thing. And then if it's a movable target all the time, can we still hit it with what we have? Find, fix, track, target. So now that's where we get the lat long elevation, at least from a bomber perspective.
Yeah.
Different, and I should say a kinetic effect for a kinetic effect kind of perspective. So that find, fix, track, target is for mostly kinetic effects. You could argue cyber too. It can use that same sort of kind of cycle in order to engage with its effects. And then you have enough quality in that position. We'll just call it positional because I guess it could be a computer terminal, right? You have enough confidence in that position, in its accuracy and its capability. Is it still doing what it's supposed to be doing? Because we don't want to waste bombs
Hmm.
on things, even if it's there. If it's not doing what we think it's doing, it's not. It's going to waste our time. So then
Right.
you engage it, and then you assess whether, which is the hardest part, assess whether your effects were effective in achieving the commander's intent.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back to the Iran example, and let's go into uh, the CENTCOM Air Operations Center, right? And you're a planner trying to plan and execute this current mission, right? Why is Iran such a complex military problem? You know, let's talk about like some of the things like geography and dispersed facilities and hardened sites and proximity networks and all that kind of stuff. What are the things about Iran that makes it a particularly challenging target set compared to other historical air campaigns?
Yeah, and so you mentioned the big ones. They can bury a lot of stuff. I think one that's really particular is I said we want to defend our fielded forces, but we also want to defend non-participants that are in the area. And so you notice for this problem set, the Strait of Hormuz is like
Yeah,
is a
yeah,
huge choke point, right? That not, both participants and non-combatants have to traverse in order for the whole thing to keep working. So if we have to dedicate uh, forces in order to protect that, that's forces that we can't use to go achieve our desired effects, in country. And
so
so,
there's an anticipation of how do we plan for their retaliation, whether it be against us or others. We got to think about that.
right. Well, and you look at how they responded. In my mind, I don't know why they responded the way they responded, because it didn't seem uh, logical to me to just start lashing out at your neighbors. But if the combatant commander sees, oh wow, I didn't see that coming. Now he's got to adjust for that. You can't just
Yeah,
pretend like it didn't happen. We have to have some sort of conversation with those players and figure out whatever they're going to do in response. It's got to support our objectives, right?
yeah, and
So
we got to deconflict efforts. But I thought it was kind of funny. Somebody online was talking about it and equated it to the analogy of, you're getting your ass whooped in a bar fight. So your response is that you're going to start randomly punching other people all around in the bar.
right, right, right. And this is pure speculation. So I heard and so that's going to cause that other person to swing back, and you might hit
Yeah,
me in the process, because I'm still hitting
yeah,
you, right?
that's right.
And if we're not working together, the reason why we have a CFAC or a coalition force air component commander is so we can deconflict and not hit each other, right? Or not, or in not just efficiency of targets. Not, oh, I thought you were going to bomb that. No, we didn't talk. I don't want you, as you're bombing him or hitting him, to hit me on the way down, right?
Right,
And you can kind of, I don't have any information on this, but those two F-15s were shot down by a Kuwaiti airplane, open
right.
source. And so, oh, I thought he was going to hit me again. Oh, that wasn't him. That was you. My bad. So, yeah. So you got to,
Yeah,
so that there's like some, we used to call it second and third order effects of,
yeah.
starting this, because it's not going to go down the way you
You think it
necessarily think,
is.
right? No plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Contact with the enemy. Yeah,
Right, right,
yeah,
right.
yeah. Absolutely. All right. So military capability does not always equal strategic inevitability. So we're right on that, and we're talking about risk. So what escalation risk will policy makers have to consider before launching a campaign like this? That's kind of takes us right to the heart of that kind of question.
Yeah, with Iran in particular, any country that we suspect of having a nuclear capability, we have to treat this like, you got to respect the threat, right? And so, every you would assume that every nuclear capable country, if they actually are, would have a trigger for using it, right? It's supposed to be for deterrence. That's our strategy, but other countries may see it differently. So, kind of to the bar fight, if you're just swinging, are you going to swing the big one? And so if you're not sure
Mm,
whether or not that country has that sort of capability, that would give you some pause on, you know,
right.
um, on whether or not you're going to do it. And then the other part is, the Rumsfeld. You don't know. There's known knowns. There's known
Known
unknowns,
unknowns.
and then there's unknown unknowns,
Known
right?
unknowns.
And then when those come out of nowhere, you want to be able to be, either resilient enough to absorb it, or hopefully in a position where you can counter it, right? And so in Iran, again, I don't have any inside baseball, but I'm not familiar with how good their drone capability is, how many they have. I don't know if we have that kind of information either, but they seem to have a lot of them, and what we use to counter them are a lot more expensive. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's almost like the paper
Very
plate
cheap
theory, right?
drones, and on the other side, we're firing multi-million-dollar Tomahawk missiles
They're throwing paper plates at us, and
or
we're throwing
precision
China,
guided munitions. Yeah,
right? They're throwing paper plates at us, and we're throwing China to knock it out the sky. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, I don't know, since we don't see how those drones and other capabilities operate very often. We don't know what their true capability is, until they, now we're finding out. I think now it's like this, you want to learn today. And so we're finding out how effective they are, right? So
Right.
those are the
Yeah,
things that give you pause, because it's got to be worth whatever you lose, has to be worth losses on our part.
that's
So
right.
yeah, so
That's right.
so you got to have, and that's what only the commander can say that. Am I willing to take the risk, in order to achieve this objective? Because I need to know that I can win, and it's going to be worth, losing. How much am I going to lose? And so if you don't have a good idea of what your foe is capable of, that would cause you some pause.
So let me take you down a hypothetical um, rabbit hole here.
Mm-hmm.
New age of asymmetric combat operations, right? Traditionally, we would feel very comfortable here in the homeland of the US. Hey, we're not worried about um, a foe striking us or invading the continental United States. We're safe, we're good. But are we now in another era where, because um, our foes are fighting unconventionally and asymmetric, that they can reach out and touch the homeland as a response through non-conventional kind of means, particularly if you're talking about drones and stuff like that that are not coming in with a whole unit to try to attack you. I got people wearing civilian clothes setting up drones, and all of a sudden they're taking out target sets in the continental United States.
Yeah.
Again, fiction, hypothetical, but what do
Well,
you
it's not
say to that?
necessarily hypothetical. I'd say, 9/11 said that they can hit us at home, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we're in a new era.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I would argue it went back to Vietnam. Why do we leave Vietnam? Because the Vietnamese were in the minds of the American public. They kept seeing those body counts, and we pulled out. We were winning that war tactically, but the North Vietnamese caused us to mentally, that war did not have public support. And so if you don't have public support, that's asymmetrically they achieved their objective. We left, right? We didn't achieve ours. And so and we're not going to have a Red Dawn moment. If you remember that movie where the freaking
Yeah,
Soviets perished, that's not going to happen.
1980s. We're dating ourselves.
Right. That's not likely to happen. But if just like after 9/11, if they were to have like some sort of, let's call it a drone attack, even a
Yeah,
small scale where it kills a couple hundred, couple thousand people, and
they're in the psyche now of the
they're in
American
our, they're
public.
like, if they could have done that, they can do it. That's exactly what happened to us after 9/11. That's why
Yes,
that's what brought us all together, though, right? And so they don't have to like take over, Cleveland. I don't know why anybody would do that, but they don't have to take over a city to like establish dominance or get in our head or even just get us to stop. to leave. And
Right.
my fear is what we've seen in a lot of these insurgency, asymmetric warfare type of things is they have a lot more resolve than you think. Our population, they're looking at the microwave. When are we going to be out of here? We'll be out of here in a couple of days.
They're looking at gas prices and grocery
Right, right,
prices and how this is affecting that,
right.
all of that kind of stuff. Yep.
And a lot of times our foes are like, my life already
I don't care
sucks.
about that.
I don't
Yeah.
care about any of that. I'll be here all day. You're in my house. You're in my house. So I'll do whatever it takes. And so, and I think a lot of times the American psyche underestimates the power of that. I think the Russians are figuring out that right now with the Ukrainians. They're like, why won't
With
they
the
give up?
Ukrainians. Yeah.
Well, you're in my house. I'm not just going to give you my house. It's where I live. I'll do whatever. So I think yeah, that's why a lot of those things to me are like those are unrealistic objectives. um, and I think we've learned that lesson a number of times.
All right. So I told you to put it on a hanger. We're back to the hanger. Let's broaden the lens to the national security planning system, right?
Yeah,
So, you know, you kind of touched upon this in your last comment, but I want you to go all the way there.
yeah.
What happens when strategic ambition exceeds resourcing or planning discipline required to execute it?
So that's where prioritization comes in. If you don't have the resources to achieve all those priorities, um, then you got to say, okay, what's the most important? And that's what the national security strategy does. Now, that's informed by the national intelligence estimate. So, you don't just make it up, right? So we have all the smartest intelligence people gather. Hey, boss, I think these are what's going to really threaten U.S. security and why. Um, Now, once you come up with that plan, if you lack planning discipline, it puts those other plans at risk. So if you start wandering, you have mission creep and start doing things that aren't part of the objectives, then it's going to require more resources. And because of what I told you at the very beginning, those resources are specifically put out to different things. And you're in the I got to rob Peter to pay Paul type of thing. You know,
Right.
I wasn't on the planning team in 1998, but as just a regular line guy, I didn't see the Kosovo War or Allied force on the horizon. And if that wasn't one of the plans, if that wasn't one of the the elimination of Slobodan Milosevic wasn't on the docket, all those resources were likely they're just not sitting around waiting to be used. They're specifically designed to address certain situations and objectives.
Yeah. So that's like one of the concerns that some professional military folks are calling out right now, that last year, when it was Operation Midnight Hammer, we depleted about 25% of the stock of our interceptor missiles and um, tomahawks. And then now going in, people are concerned about kind of the levels and the stockpiles of our munitions, particularly precision guided munitions and um, interceptors and tomahawks and all of that kind of stuff like that. Because there wasn't put in extra, even though there was more money put into the defense budget, that was put in and earmarked for specific things. So it's not like extra money sitting around to now make up for that. You
Right,
now have to rob Peter to pay Paul from other areas where you're going to have to take other kind of risks, whether that be the Pacific, whether that be wherever, right?
right, right. And it might warrant it. That's why you get paid the big bucks as the leader. It might warrant it,
Correct.
but you
There's
will take
nothing is ever perfect.
nothing is ever perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes a threat will come out of the blue that warrants you using that, but you have to do that deliberately and knowing that you're going to accept risk, because it's not just with resources, it's also with training. So while you got your
Yes.
forces committed to doing this operation, they're not practicing to do those other
Training. Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So it better be what you're planning on doing. Otherwise, you're, like you said, you're going to have risk in several areas.
Yeah, you got to make a deliberate decision-making process, which then brings me to the number two concern that a lot of professional military types point out right now. It seems like right now there isn't as structured of a national security system that has been in place throughout many different administrations. It was very structured, very disciplined, very deliberate kind of um, structure, and it was done that way deliberately, right? Because
Mm.
we want to make sure that it's um, correctly vetted before it gets to the principals, before the president or the national command authority gets involved. It has to go through all of these different wickets and processes. So,
Right.
a good, strong National Security Council in the White House was extremely important because that National Security Council was taking inputs from all of these different departments, defense, state saying this, Homeland Security saying this, the CIA is saying this, these folks are saying this, and then take it, synchronize it, harmonize it, and then give it to the president so the president can make a very good uh, decision on it. Right now, it seems kind of ad hoc and it seems very personality driven, if you
Yeah.
will, rather than the structured discipline process that maybe existed in the past.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of insight on how the process is working now. I mean, it does, just from a fly on the wall view, it's not what we normally do, and that's not always the answer. It did make me think, ironically, like the genesis of how we got to where we are now with combatant commands, the National Security Council, the principles that started after the failure in Iran when we couldn't we couldn't get the hostages out. Remember that failed mission?
Oh yeah, that's
So,
that's a great point. That's a
right.
great point. That's where that came from.
That's right. So
Yes,
Brent Scowcroft, who was the national security advisor for President Reagan, I believe, he's the one who kind of really organized the NSC. And then
yes,
from that we had the Goldwater Nichols Act, and
that's right. Of
right,
86,
assigned all the
87.
right.
Yep,
So
yep,
we it does appear sometimes that we're like, hey, didn't we learn this lesson before? You can't just tear everything down, because this is like the calluses of things that we've screwed up in the past. And it's
yes.
not just because we're trying to be excessive or just trying to create jobs. It's because we need some layers in order to protect ourselves from making stupid decisions, or making sure that we make the best decision. I should say it like that,
Best decisions.
because
Yeah,
most of these
yeah.
guys don't have bad intentions. I don't think any of them do, but they're not
Correct.
just they're not necessarily equipped to do that. And so, like, when I look at the structure now, only one really kind of stands out. But, like, when the national security advisor is also the Department of State, uh,
Yes.
you're like, well, you
How
know
can that happen in a national security when, by definition, the national security advisor is supposed to be harmonizing all of
exactly,
the
that's a
different
big role.
inputs? How can he also be wearing the hat as Secretary of State? It
And
seems
so he's
weird.
harmonizing all those inputs, one of which is his.
Right.
Right? So he's a stakeholder in that whole process. So I mean, are you gonna, okay, I'm gonna take off this hat and then put on this? And so, I just I just would hope that folks would have an appreciation historically how we got here. And normally, um, when you get to a bureaucracy this large, making a whole lot of changes all at once normally doesn't end well. You want to tweak something, see what happens, because then if it falls apart, you don't know what you did. You don't know, and
Right.
bureaucracy is more acute because it's so large. If you make all these wholesale changes and it doesn't work, well, where do you start putting it back together? What was the lynch, the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. So, um, yeah, I would be very hesitant, because, like, during my time across administrations, there was very little change in the priorities. Which gives stability to the services, right? Because now they can buy and they train, and the theaters can plan. They don't have to change their plan all the time, because there's enough change just with the intelligence assessments across all of that stuff,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And then at the services, time, schedule,
Yes.
and price, or cost, schedule, and what's the last one for production?
Performance.
Thank you. Performance. Yeah, because it didn't do what we
Yeah.
thought it was going to do. So now we got to go
Yeah.
back to the yeah. Thank you. That's why you're a freaking black belt. Yeah, that was even farther back for me. But yeah, so I think if you start sharing a lot of those hats, it's going to make you less good at one of them. So you'll be like the F-16 of national defense.
No, you
Can do a
didn't.
lot of things,
No,
but good
you
at
didn't
nothing.
just say that. My beloved Viper.
I had the
How
shot. I took
dare
it.
you?
There was no danger.
Sacrilege.
Okay, I take that back. I like my Viper buddies, to include you.
All right. So let's bring this conversation home to Guam, right? So our island plays a critical role in America's power projection and the Indo-Pacific deterrence posture, right? So, from your perspective as a former commander at Anderson Air Force Base, what should people here understand about Guam's importance in national security and some of those lessons of what we're seeing over in the Middle East about um, planning systems to then apply to over here in Indo-Pacific theater?
Yeah, and so the lack of space is at least um, naval wise, sea wise, is what the big challenge is in Iran. The abundance of space is what the challenge is in the Pacific, and so
Mm,
you have to be able to plan almost autonomously sometimes, because you're not guaranteed comms, you're not guaranteed freedom of action all the time. And so you need to have really good mission type specific orders so you can, be cut off for an undetermined amount of time and still get your, do your job. So to me, that's the biggest thing for just the Pacific in general. And for Guam specifically, the logistics support that's required to keep an operation going, is not the same as like the Middle East. Again, the tyranny of distance comes into play. Even communicating those requirements is more challenging, even in a cyber age. The time zone difference. You gotta adjust to the theater that you're at. I mean, even Guam can be
yeah.
several time zones for what they're trying to impact. Not not
Yes.
not right exactly where they are. So the tyranny of distance in Guam makes that logistically and operationally a lot more challenging. And so that was a lot of the things that I tried to work on when I was there, is like, what's the worst thing that can happen? How could I operate? What kind of information would I need from my commander to like do my job and not talk to him for a long time, a day, a week? you know is that possible? That's the way they used to do it in World War II, man. You'd send a commander out with his thing, and I said, at the end of the day, I want you to do this, this, and this, and you have this time frame to do it in. you know and
Go
obviously,
forth and conquer.
right, go forth and conquer. And because we are so over reliant on real-time information, and getting it, start with the predator feed, and the general is in the predator, looking at it. We would never have a senior leader doing that, because that's way at the weeds of the tactical stuff, right? He's planning for tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
Now you got it in the situation of the room of the White House.
Right,
They're watching the
right,
feed. Yeah.
right. And so that becomes your crack. And so when you get addicted to it and it goes away, then what? You're like, wait, how am I supposed to make a decision? Well, you need to be thinking, we have to train. You remember when we did red flag exercises? We have the old general, retired general, to be like the CFAC, and
Yeah.
he helped us think, not just for the moment, but he would give us that long term perspective that a CFAC should give, when prosecuting a war. And that was on purpose, because it brought back. It wasn't a current person. It was somebody that was older, and it wasn't just because of availability. It was for perspective, I think. And so
Yes.
we got to keep that mindset going. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And uh, I loved how you phrased that about the tyranny of distance and um, you know, What you didn't say was um, um, contested logistics, but all of that makes a national security case about the importance of Guam and Micronesia and why we really need to develop ourselves as this sustainment hub that can um, really provide world-class sustainment services and a readiness posture to all of the forces that flow through here, whether they be maritime forces, um, air forces, or even land forces, because it's needed in order to execute um, our national security goals, not just because it's good for Guam's economy. It's both, but it's
Right.
more important that it's good for to achieve our national security goals. So beyond just the construction support to build up buildings on Camp Blas or whatever, or one of the other bases, it's important to build a sustainment ecosystem so that we can repair ships, we can repair aircraft, that we can pre-position war material, war readiness material, that we can move that stuff very quickly amongst different islands and be able to help forces set up that stuff and operate for 2 weeks here. And oh, by the way, now we're going to pack all that stuff up and want to go someplace else. And another island's ready to jump in and be able to support that detachment of forces and be able to do that. That's the way we've got to be able to operate here in the Pacific. So not just Guam, but all of the different outer islands have a play in this. And you don't get that like once the fighting starts. That's something that's intentional and it's built over years. I would even say decades. There's a
Right.
lot of stuff that needs to come forward in terms of technology, industrial capability, etc., in order to make that happen. And that's why it's so important for Guam to get in about this right now.
Well, and so Guam is like it's like the early adapter, right? I mean, because we've been operating out of there, and like you mentioned, we have to be logistically agile. Agile combat employment. We need to be able to operate not just out of Guam, but all kinds of different islands in the Pacific. And so, but Guam, because we've been working out of there, can be the boilerplate on how we move logistically, how we move operationally, how we set up communication. And then we just pattern that in other different areas. I'll tell you what's the biggest difference between what's going on in Iran in Guam. So if something kicked off in the Pacific, we don't have that kind of combat power in place. We've been operating out of the Middle East for over 2 decades. We've already got the basing. Even if they weren't there currently, we go in and out of there so often that the logistics lines, all the comm lines, all that is already preset.
That's why World War II bomber airfields on Tinian are being refurbished and restored after almost a half a century or
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. But those kind of investments are needed all over the place, and even
Right.
more important, technology, like bringing technology here forward and industrial capability so that you don't have to retrograde everything, that
Right.
um, you're able to refurbish, sustain, retrofit, repair in place and put it back into the fight. That logistics and sustainment capability is deterrence.
Right.
That is deterrence. Your ability to be able to do that, because without it, and you have to rely on just retrograde, that is going to exhaust you, and your enemy knows that
Right.
it's going to
Exactly.
exhaust you. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So what things would you do intentionally or do different if you were sitting in the Indo-PACOM AOC and you were doing a conflict out of this theater? What things would be on your radar scope in terms of putting together that plan?
Yeah. So, you know,
without getting into classified
right,
information.
my information and my information would be dated too, but we know who the usual suspects are. I
Yes.
would, because of those usual suspects, I would want partners to help, because of the amount of distance you got to cover, the amount of capability that you'd have to address. We need to work on our partnerships, whether it be with the
Yes.
Japanese, the South Koreans, the Australians, New Zealanders, the
Philippines,
Philippines, yep, Singapore,
Singapore,
yep,
Taiwan, so
Taiwan,
on.
all those partners. We have more bilateral relationships in the Pacific than we have anywhere else in the world. 7, if I remember right. But
Yeah.
those partnerships are important, so we don't have to feel the whole weight of whatever happens. And so, what does that mean? When we practice this, we have to plan, execute, and assess together. We have to do that ATO cycle together. So we don't want to start building relationships while people are wiping blood off their floor. We want to be able to build those relationships, figure out how we communicate now. So that would, my priority would be, practicing with our partners from
Yeah.
all services. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Sam, thank you for another outstanding conversation. Um, do you have any words of wisdom for the audience before we go? And in addition to words of wisdom, if anybody wants to reach out and contact you, are you willing to share how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Words of wisdom. I don't think I've ever said. You've known me long enough to know that I haven't said anything intelligent in a long, long, long time. But at least wise. Uh, but I like I like innovation. I think if we were to do anything going forward, you have to innovate. You have to always kind of reinvent yourself, rethink the way you do things. That's how we've stayed dominant militarily, how we've stayed dominant as an air force, as a nation. And so, even anywhere in your life, if you're not reinventing yourself, innovating what you're doing, trying to find a better way, continue to learn and grow, you're gonna retrograde, right? So
Yes.
that's what I try to do. And if anybody does want to get in contact me, my email address is sam at Redtail Academy, all lowercase, all one word, .org. And Redtail is after the famous Tuskegee Airmen of World War II.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we're about to the last of them, but we named our
Yeah,
organization.
that whole group of heroes, like you said, we're on about the last of them. Um, yeah, definitely motivators for both of us through our
Absolutely.
careers. Talking to those guys and hearing those stories coming up as young Air Force officers, they were inspirations for us all.
And I'll tell you why they were inspirational to me specifically is, especially in this current climate, they never complained about how they were treated. They just wanted a shot to show how good they are, and
Yeah,
I think that's really what we're trying to do. That's the intent is, I don't really care how you feel. Nobody
that's
cares how
right.
you feel, but I will show you if you give me the chance how well I can do this. And so that's
They fought ignorance with excellence rather
exactly.
than complaining and what my rights are and this isn't fair. It was just
Just give
give
me a
me a
shot.
chance.
Just give me a
Just give
shot.
me a shot.
Give me a shot. Let's see how it
And
works out.
then,
Let's see how it works out.
yeah.
You gonna learn today. Yeah,
I love it. So thank you for coming back and giving us an inside peek of the planning that goes on for an air campaign and a peek behind maybe what's going on there in current events over in Iran. For my audience, I hope today's discussion helped you all learn something. I certainly did. Um, Please watch for other podcasts dropping each week. And don't forget to follow me on all social media platforms, including Substack. And also check out my Innovate column in the Pacific Daily News on the first and third Fridays of each month. Until next time, no matter whether you're at work, at home, or at play, always innovate. Thank you.